welcome to Write On with Tom Fallwell, a bi-weekly podcast focusing on interviews, novels, reviews, and upcoming releases from indie authors. Now, here's Tom.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show. This is episode 15 and I'm glad you're listening to the show today. A bit later in this episode we will be talking with author A.M. Justice. As well, I have a book reading for you and news about some great new releases you should check out. I'm also very pleased to say that Write On with Tom Fallwell has been nominated for Best Fantasy Podcast for the upcoming Virtual Fantasy Con of 2017 that is scheduled for October 15th through the 21st on Facebook this year. Authors and service providers will have their own virtual booths during the event, and I hope you will plan to attend and meet all that interest you. It will be a great event for finding and meeting new authors and new books and those who provide author and publishing services. Before we get started today, here's a word from one of our great sponsors.
Are you a new indie artist looking for a way to market yourself? Maybe it's time to go indie now. Go Indie Now is an online platform that highlights, fosters, and supports indie artists of all art forms. Our shows on YouTube do everything they can to bring an audience to what you're doing. So head on over to goindienow.com, find our channel on YouTube by searching Go Indie Now, all one word, and remember, it's always time to go indie now. We'll see you there.
Next up, I have a reading for you from one of my own books, A Whisper in the Shadows, the first book in my Rangers of Lorien series. This is an excerpt direct from the available audiobook version, narrated by Douglas Puller. You'll find a link to this book on the podcast page.
Without a sound, Beric rose to his feet and drew his broadsword, gesturing to Whisper. She too rose and listened as she silently moved to a darkened corner and drew two long curved daggers from beneath her robe. The howl pierced the air again. They could still see fairly well, as full darkness had not set in yet. Beric turned his attention to a hole in the back wall on the south side of the house. There was no doubt that a Warwick was nearby. He listened and could just make out the faintest sounds of movement. There was more than one. Through the opening came a blur of black fur as a Warwick leapt through, running straight for Beric. More than twice the size of the largest wolf and far more savage, a single Warwick was a ferocious adversary, even against two armed defenders. He swung his great blade deftly, but the Warwick dodged to the side and went past him, forcing Beric to do an about-face to keep the monster in front of him. Whisper was about to leap into the fray when she saw another Warwick come through the opening, heading for Beric's unprotected back. Fast as she was, the Warwick would be on him before she could reach it, and she would not be able to fight one of them face to face if it attacked her. Though reluctant, she used her Shadow Walk spell, and in an instant was on the right side of the second Warwick, behind its head, her daggers digging into both sides of its neck and severing the main artery. Beric thrust his sword ahead with both hands and only grazed the Warwick in front of him. But it was not enough to slow the beast. He spun to his left, trying to dodge the Warwick's snapping jaws, but its teeth ripped into his upper right arm, drawing blood. He saw Whisper out of the corner of his eye, stabbing a second Warwick, which now lay on the floor bleeding profusely, her twin blades deep into the chest, piercing its heart. The Warwick went limp. Beric swung a mighty blow that cut the front legs out from under the Warwick in front of him, and it fell to the floor with a pained growl. He swiftly finished it off with an overhead swing that cleaved the Warwick's head, killing it instantly. Looking quickly to the hole in the wall, he was relieved to find no more Warwicks attacking. He looked at the Warwick that she had killed, then into her eyes, with not a small amount of admiration. Assassin indeed. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. still tense as she turned to look at the opening in the wall. "Are there more?" "I don't think so," said Barrick. "They're usually solitary. It's seldom that they travel in pairs. I've never seen more than that. These two were no doubt mates." Whisper saw that was indeed the case, a male and female. She wiped her blades on the female at her feet and then slid the daggers back into the belt sheaths within her robe. She looked up and saw Barrick was looking at her with a grin, peeking out from his bearded face. "That was impressive. Thank you," he said. She smiled, appreciating his compliment. "You are welcome." She then noticed his arm. "You're bleeding." Barrick looked at his wound. The Warwick's teeth had pierced his arm and ripped a nasty gash. It was not serious, but it was deep. He cleaned his sword before returning it to the scabbard on his back. He pulled a small jar from his pack, removed the cover, and dipped his finger into it. It contained a greenish salve, which he smeared liberally on his wound. "What is that?" she asked. Barrick returned the jar to his pack and removed a cloth strip which he used to bind his wound. "A healing salve, made from aloe and magically treated by the Ranger's magicians. The wound will heal in a few days. It's not serious." "Should we worry about another attack? What about the wolves we heard earlier?" Barrick waved his hand dismissively. "I don't expect there are any more Warwicks in this area, and the wolves were most likely howling because of them. I think we're safe for now."
Now for some news from the indie author community. I have 3 new releases to tell you about today. These books are either available now or are available for pre-order using the links you will find on my podcast page. The first new release I want to tell you about is a paranormal thriller called Every Storm Breaks by Ellie Fitzpatrick. When a Reacher terrorist group enlists the help of a deranged serial killer, their goal is simple: bring about chaos in Britain. But when the death count starts rising, chaos comes sooner than expected. With the tension between the London elite and the surrounding slums reaching breaking point, Charlie finds himself in handcuffs on the wrong side of the border. Government agents are closing in, and Charlie is running out of time. Can his friends save him in time? And when the storm comes, will anyone get out alive? The next new release I want to tell you about is Orbs of Trinity by Newland Moon. This is a science fantasy duology, and this is the second book. They poisoned his planet, massacred his people, and violated his mother. Then they came for him. After an interplanetary betrayal nearly decimated his world, Zron struggled to protect his people and reclaim his legitimacy as their ruler. Now he has received the rights of Erdron and vowed to defend the Triax planets torn asunder by a corrupt galactic council and the Shadow Whisperers who've manipulated them all. With the aid of First Commander Lizaean and his Q-Nutwanian fleet, Zrons must unite the factions that deceived them in the past. The ensuing battle is for more than the survival of Triaxion, it's for the liberation of the galaxy. It's worth noting that the first book in this duology, Rights of Erdron, was nominated for Best Science Fantasy Novel in the Virtual FantasyCon 2017 Awards, and the 2-book series was nominated for Best Romance Series. Finally, there's a new release coming from author Patrick Hodges. It's the second book in his Wielders of Arantha series entitled Queens. This is a sci-fi tale with some fantasy elements. This series was also nominated for the Virtual FantasyCon 2017 Awards. On the planet Elystra, a battle between good and evil is underway. Elzor seeks the 3 stones of the prophecy and will stop at nothing to get them. The Extrayu, after 8 centuries of isolation and secrecy, is his next target. Kinkelia and her warriors, along with Earth pilot Maeve, hope to survive against such overwhelming odds. With nothing less than the fate of the galaxy at stake, this is a battle they cannot afford to lose. Queens will be available soon. In the meantime, you'll find a link on the podcast page to the first book of Patrick Hodges' great series. I have with me today author A.M. Justice, Amanda, and she has written a book called The Wizard's Forge that has a very beautiful cover. We're going to have a conversation with her and let you get to know her. Say hello to Amanda. Amanda, welcome, and tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on. Well, my name is A.M. Justice, and although it sounds like I ought to be writing either westerns or detective fiction, I actually write science fiction and fantasy. That's where my heart lies in the genre world, and so that's what I've been doing for most of my fiction writing career.
So when you decided to become an author, what prompted that? How did that come about?
I think for me, it started way, way, way back in high school, and just writing stories is kind of a way to escape from humdrum, boring high school existence. And I wasn't the kind of kid who went out and partied or anything like that. I stayed home and I read a lot and I watched a lot of TV, and I started writing stories to kind of amuse myself and imagine, bigger and better things in the world for myself. So that's how it started for me. I also had ambitions to be an actress way back at that time, and I thought that maybe if I wrote my own kind of stories that I would like to act in, that would help facilitate that part of that ambition that I had. It didn't really work out that way because I discovered in college that I wasn't actually a very good actress. So it's not something that I ever pursued.
How long have you been an author?
I released my first novels in 2012, and those actually, I decided to pull them from the market, so they're actually out of print right now. But I've been writing longer than that in terms of just writing fiction for myself and practicing the craft and honing the craft. I've been working on it since the late 1980s. So. Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm also my day job. I'm a freelance writer, so I get a lot of practice writing.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I was noticing on your biography, you do scuba diving, hiking. You kind of an outdoors person.
I am now. I wasn't, as I mentioned, when I was back in high school, I was very much an indoors person, but that changed over the years, and I do love to hike. I love to dive. That's actually, I'm probably more comfortable underwater with a regulator in my mouth than I am anywhere else, any time else in the world. So, and that was another ambition that I had when I was really young. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an actress or a marine biologist. And I ended up being neither, but I do still pursue the scuba diving. Is a great hobby that I have and I love.
Yeah. Do any of these experiences find their way into your stories?
I have a scene, an underwater scene that I've written. It's in one of my works in progress that is based on just experiences of being underwater and observing the fish and so forth. And there are. I'm also astronomy is also a hobby that I have, and I have some scenes of characters looking through telescopes and stargazing. And there's a short story that I wrote that recently won an award that features a telescope as an item in the story. But other than that, it's not really a major. Those experiences aren't really a major part of my work. It's more, my work is more psychological and also your typical fantasy epic adventures along those lines.
I was looking at you. You did won first place science fiction and fantasy of the 2016 Writers Digest. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That was a story called The Weight of Bliss, and it's about a physician whose lover was killed by the government leader, by the dictator of the country that he lives in, and he's mourning that loss, and he turns to a narcotic that he becomes addicted to. So it's really a story of someone who hits rock bottom in their life and then has to find a way back, has to turn things around, basically, is what that story is about.
Okay. But right now, what you got big out here, it looks like, is a book called A Wizard's Forge. And as I had noted, that has a beautiful cover. I take it that the main character is female, just looking at the cover. So why don't you tell us a little about that and what the story's about?
Well, A Wizard's Forge is about a young woman named Victoria who goes by the nickname Vic, she prefers, and she has a pretty hard life as detailed in A Wizard's Forge. She starts out living in a remote area in her world, and she's almost, in the first chapter, she's kidnapped by slavers who sell her to the villain, let's just say that. Okay. And she has some pretty bad experiences with him, and these experiences shape her in ways that carry through in the entire rest of the novel. So she eventually escapes captivity with him and goes to the country of his enemies, and she's taken in by the ruling family of that nation, and they harbor her and they help her, and she, in gratitude and also out of a desire for revenge, joins their army and then becomes a fairly renowned warrior in their army, all with a mind to avenge the terrible things that this individual did to her earlier in her life. And the book is sort of about the cost of revenge, because people are, there's a number of revenge scenarios playing out in the novel. There's hers, but there are some older ones that exist between other characters, and things don't really work out too well for many of the characters in the book who are pursuing these kind of violent ideas of seeking vengeance.
Okay. It's labeled as book one, so you're planning on more in this series?
Yes, I'm writing the second book. The second book is called A Wizard's Sacrifice, and the series is set up so that each book can be read on its own. So the story at the end of A Wizard's Forge, that completes that portion of Vic's life, and then her story continues in the next book. So you could think of it as, if this were like the superhero world, you could think of A Wizard's Forge as Vic's origin story, because by the end of it, she ends up having supernatural powers. And then the next story, in the next book in the series, she really uses those supernatural powers in some unexpected ways, and it is faced with having to confront a destiny that is mentioned in the first book, but which in the first book everyone thinks, including her and almost everyone around her, thinks is is not real. They think this is not a people who really believe in prophecies or destinies or anything like that. A lot of the characters in the world of A Wizard's Forge don't believe in mysticism or any kind of supernatural happenings, even while they have characters with supernatural powers living in their world. So there's a lot of skepticism in
Okay.
that, among the people.
That sounds interesting. And when will this next book be coming out, do you think?
The next book, I'm hoping to deliver it to the publishing outfit that I work with, and I'm hoping that it will come out next year. So I'm still in the midst of revising it. It needs, the manuscript is finished, but it needs a lot of massaging to get it into shape. So
Okay. I noticed you have some entries in SciFi magazine, which
yes.
I'm also writing a story for, by the way. What did you have in there? Just some excerpts, or did you put some short stories in there?
There's the February edition there is an excerpt from A Wizard's Forge in that edition, and the one that came out in July has a short story that I wrote called Round Trip Ticket on the Northbound Train. And the short story is if you want to classify it, I would call it a weird Western retelling of the Orpheus myth. So it places Hades and the land of Hades in the Old West, and Orpheus comes to retrieve his lost love, just like it occurs in the myth. But in the case of my story, the whole thing is told from Persephone's point of view.
Oh, okay, that sounds cool. Might have to check that out too. The indie community as a whole, have you had good experiences with other authors? Have any of them been helpful for you in getting your books published and everything?
I think that the indie community is really supportive of other authors, and I've never had a bad experience with another indie author. Everyone has always been really supportive of my work in terms of just trying to get the I apologize, there's a printer just came on in the background, so it's causing some noise.
I'm not hearing it, so that's good.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So I could have just kept talking and nobody would have heard it. Anyway, what I was saying, I think the indie community is great. That people have always been very, very helpful in terms of sharing resources and helping to promote each other's work and so forth. So I think that it can be, it's a great experience to be an indie author in terms of finding a community of kindred spirits and like-minded souls. Taking the indie route has its downsides, though. It can be really a long haul to try to get your work out there and find your audience and find and build a following. So those are things that sometimes I feel like I struggle with, and I wish that would come more naturally to me. But in terms of I consider all other indie authors my colleagues, and I think that we have, I have a great working relationship with everyone I know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've met anyone who thinks of. Well, I'll take that back. I haven't met very many people who think of other authors as competitors.
Yes.
I mean, we're not really competing. We have different audiences, so it's really not a competition.
And it really isn't a competition. And in a sense, if you do have an author who's writing books that are very similar to yours, it behooves you to help each other because you share an audience. It's not like people choose. It's not a Coke versus Pepsi situation where people are going to only choose this author's work versus that author's work. Yeah. They will choose both. So, and And I think that's one of the advantages of being in that community and sharing. And I've certainly participated with other authors with newsletter shares and promotions. And I think that the subscribers to our newsletters appreciate it when we are able to share, hey, you know, here's this other book from this other great author that's coming out, and, you know, I think you should check it out, and so forth. So those are all great opportunities that, you know, we have, that we can support each other in the indie community. I think it's also important just to continue also in some ways through writing critique groups and stuff, to also challenge each other to become better as authors, to help dispel the notion that indie authors are somehow less qualified as writers than traditionally published authors.
Yeah, I agree. I've read some traditionally published books that were not so good compared to some of the indie books I've read.
Well, exactly. I think that's something. It's such a myth that traditionally published authors are automatically, quote unquote, better writers than the indie authors, because they, you know, traditionally, the choice of getting your book traditionally published is driven by so many market factors and what the industry at that moment thinks is going to be saleable and popular. And it doesn't always mesh up with being a great writer or having a high writing quality. Meanwhile, there are a lot of indie authors who are doing work that's really on the edge of, you know, maybe it's unusual, or it's not, doesn't fit into a specific genre, and so a traditional publisher might not see a path to marketing it, whereas, you know, an indie author in some ways has more flexibility to be able to find their niche. And certainly those of us who are science fantasy authors, such as yourself and myself, are fall into that category because we write these genre blends that sometimes people don't really know what to make of.
Yep, I agree with you. So we got your website is amjusticeauthor.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you're on Twitter as @amjusticewrites.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any events you're going? Do you do live events? Anything coming up that you want everyone to know about?
There's nothing coming up at the moment. I feel like I need to get myself more involved in the live events business, but I haven't done that yet. So the main noteworthy event that is coming up in the future is, that's coming up is just the fact that it will be 1 year. Wizard's Forge was released on September 19th, 2016. So at the time of this broadcast, it has been just about a year that the book has been out. And so I will be doing some promotional activities related to that. But
okay.
At the time of this taping, I haven't decided what those are yet. So.
Well, congratulations on the anniversary. And
thank you very much.
I will definitely have links for you on our podcast page so that they can find your book and find you. And I guess we're getting close to wrapping up, but maybe just some final advice on someone who's just starting out and wanting to be an author or hadn't got nothing out yet, or trying to decide whether to send them off to some agent and hope they get published or go in the indie route. What would you say to a new and coming up author?
I would say, first of all, before you decide whether you want to pursue a traditional publishing contract or be an indie author, that you first focus on the craft of writing the best book that you can possibly write. And so I don't think that people should put the cart before the horse. And what does that mean, and what does that entail? Well, there are certain tips that people can follow in terms of how to complete a novel, and that in writing every single day helps. It can help to outline your work, although I'm not an outliner. I'm what they call a pantser. So I kind of just write and follow where the writing takes me, and then go back in the second draft and shape it into something that works as a story. But people just have to find their way. And there are books that people can buy or read, and lots of blogs that people can read about how to write, how to complete. There are writing motivational ideas that people can do, like NaNo, which is the National Novel Writing something or other.
NaNoWriMo.
Yes. NaNoWriMo, which is National November.
I can never remember.
Writing. I can't remember writing month, something like that. But a lot of people do that, and it is very helpful to them because you join up with a team of other writers, and you have word count goals, and it's sort of a team effort to get your work done and hopefully finish an entire novel in 1 month's time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be really helpful to people who have trouble just actually getting the words out on the page. My advice to people who do that, though, is don't try to get that novel that you churned out during NaNoWriMo published right off the bat. Go back and revise it, make sure that it works as a story, share it with critique partners, share it with beta readers, listen to what people have to tell you when they tell you about the problems in the book, because I don't care how good a writer you are or how experienced a writer you are, there will be problems in your first draft that will need fixing. And the purpose of showing your work to people is not for them to tell you how great it is. It's for them to tell you where the problems are, and so that you can fix them and make it better. And I'm a really, really firm believer in the value of letting people see your work and give you constructive feedback on it.
Okay.
And having a thick skin, and also not getting discouraged by constructive feedback. You know, somebody tells you there's a problem in your book doesn't mean that it's a crappy book. It means that it can be a better book if you consider what they're saying and try to fix it. So those are things that I think are important for writers to consider. And then when you have a finished book, going to the indie and making the choice between going indie or going traditional publishing will really depend on a lot of factors. It's going to depend on your time, how much time you have to put into it. It's going to depend on how much money you have to put into it, because going the indie route takes a financial investment from people up front. And I think a lot of indie authors don't really realize that until they're into it. It's a business effort, you know. You have to invest money if you want to make money, and you have to invest time too. Yeah. But going the traditional way and submitting to agents and publishers is actually less costly, but it can be much more time consuming, because it can take a very long time to find someone who likes your work. No matter how good your work is, it can take a really long time to find the right person who likes it. And the most famous case of that is J.K. Rowling, who got rejection letters for years for Harry Potter, and was living on welfare and just scraping by financially. And then finally she found an agent and a publisher who were willing to take a chance on that book, and now of course she's like the most famous author in the world. So those things do happen, and you have to have faith in yourself, and you can't give up. That's my advice.
Yeah, can't give up. That's do your homework and practice. just like with anything else, I think. So.
Exactly.
We're running out of time, and I want to thank you for being with us today, Amanda. Like I said, we'll have on the podcast page when this episode airs, we will have your links so they can find you and find your book. And I wish you much luck in the future with your book and with what you are writing now. And I'm sure people will be looking forward to that next book in that series. So thank you for being with us. It was wonderful having you here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tom, for having me on.
C.G. Blade's pseudoverse novels are a sarcastic look into mankind's race to develop the first conscious artificial intelligence and achieve singularity. The problem is that most of the runners in this race are sadistic, hell-bent on destruction of DNA as we know it, and have a fondness for those missing a Y chromosome. Why, you ask? From cobalt to crimson to emerald, this is one wild, mysterious roller coaster ride as a hidden puppet master is slowly but surely gaining ground on humankind. C.G.'s newest novel, Onyx, goes back 26 years before Cobalt and explains the beginning of it all. Will humanity finally become steady? Tropa is all around us now as heliotrope starts to take shape. We hope you enjoy this little slice of science fiction heaven which fuses historical science fiction, satire, horror, and plenty of hidden Easter eggs along the way. Join us in liberating the pseudos from Pseudosynth Press Publishing. Well, that's it for our show today. Authors, please remember to inform me of any new releases or events you would like to be announced from the show by filling out the appropriate forms. Go to tomfallwell.com/podcast and click the podcast submissions button. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with more. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel to be notified of new episodes. You'll find a button on the podcast page to reach my channel. Remember, that's at tomfallwell.com/podcast. Thanks again, and I'll be back. In the meantime, write on.